Congratulations on getting this far in building a full stack application. This might surprise you because you probably thought that full stack involved Node on the back end and React on the front end with some type of database like MongoDB hanging off the back. This is actually an outdated concept for full stack applications, and software is getting much more flexible and more creative. The full stack application has layers. It has a front-end client. It's what the user sees and interacts with. Often involves clicking some buttons, maybe a drop down, moving things around the screen. There's a back-end server side logic. Often it's written in Python, could be written in Java, could be written in JavaScript. It's still popular. It often has an APIs on the back end to communicate with the front end, and it does data processing. There is a database, and up to now you haven't used a database, but we can easily add one in to our Python backend. And there's some type of infrastructure where everything runs. There are 4 basic layers to the stack. The top layer is the front end. It's what the user sees, and maybe it's the one that people are most familiar with, right? Because you go to a website, could be a website, could be a mobile app, but you go to some type of UI and you interact with an application. There's a backend, which is kind of a bit of a mystery for most people. Well, what's in this backend? It generally has an application, often in Python, that processes the information from the front end, gets the information from a database, and pushes it out. For persistent data, to store it between different times you go to a website, there is a database. And there's many types of databases. The big one is actually SQL, and that's the one that most of the data in the world is stored in. And then there's infrastructure host. For each layer, you're going to have different options, and we picked a single set of options for you. Once you know what the concepts are for each of the different options, you can pick the best option for your own work environment, your own project. Maybe you want to get some additional practice. The front end, it's because it's what everyone sees. It's maybe these words are thrown out the most. So the old school is you're directly writing in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And this has seen a recent increase in interest, vanilla JavaScript. So they're dumping the frameworks that were created after and going back to JavaScript due to some problems with the framework. Although the frameworks are still very popular. You have direct control over the web in this way, but it does require learning multiple languages and could be thought of as more complex for beginners. Because it's more complex, these individual discrete technologies, they're often, you have an abstraction layer to make it easier for the developer. It does introduce limitations. So the big one, the most popular one is React and its variants. There are many variants of React. It's backed by big name company, Meta, Facebook, you might be more familiar with, Instagram. It's probably the most popular JavaScript framework. Vue is much newer, and it's still pretty popular, but maybe not as popular as React. Angular has more features, but it's heavier, and it's backed by Google. The one that we've been using is a Python-based front end. It's not the most popular, and it's not used in industry. So I wouldn't go to a job interview expecting them to be familiar with Flet. We are using it for learning purposes, so you can learn the concepts of the full stack development prior to digging into something like HTML. Flet, we're using it because it can use it to build apps only with Python. You don't have to learn HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, which can be pretty time-consuming to get the styling correct and everything aligned up properly in React. It's great if you just want an entry point and focus on the Python concepts and the programming algorithm concepts, which you'll have to get through in your CS classes. You need to be aware that the approach you're taking in the class is not the traditional approach. To do a traditional approach, you need to have pretty good competence in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You'd also need to learn a back-end system if you're using it with an LLM or a large language model for AI. Python is by far the most popular. So you probably aren't going to use, you could, but most people aren't, they're not using Node on the back end simply because there's more tooling and more packages for Python for AI applications at the current time. And it's looking like it's going to stay that way for a while. Our approach, you can quickly dig into the Python programming concepts and quickly get a GUI up with just Python. We're focused on the programming concepts and not the actual techniques in this course. So these are the concepts that you'll need to advance up into years maybe 1 to 3 in CS. It's a very lightweight coverage of the concepts, but we hope to introduce concepts like async IO, threading, queues, these types of things which you'll cover in much more depth. But prior to taking your courses, it's good to be familiar with maybe actually using it, so when the concept comes up, you can anchor it in, oh, you've already built something that's using threads, queues, background processes, async await, these type of concepts. Also, by not dealing with the front end, you can focus in on arguably more important things such as the industry standing tooling that you're going to need to use for collaborative workflow. These are things like GitHub, Git, and Docker. You can get started with GitHub pretty easily and Git, but it goes rather deep. And you need to practice with collaborative industry standard tooling and deployment tooling to advance. The trade-off with this focus is that you're not learning something like React in our course curriculum. You'll have to learn it on your own. You'll learn more about the concepts of the full stack. So the back-end options in the full stack, Node, you probably heard of it because it's written in JavaScript. And people are trying to use JavaScript on the front end and the back end, which is a valid option. It's completely valid. Another big one is Django, which is a older and full-featured Python framework that is in still wide use right now. There's many applications that's still in use and it's using Django. And new applications are absolutely being built on Django. Because Django is somewhat heavy, Flask was developed later, which is a lighter weight Python framework. It's more flexible. Companies started moving from Django to Flask as their application got really big. I guess the most famous example is probably Instagram. And there's a newer framework for Python, which is called Fast API. There's a lot of advantages, and this is actually what our Fast Op course is based on. I think it's the best one to use to communicate with LLM applications. This course is using even a more low level. We're using UV-Corn directly, and this is what Fast API is built on. Fast API is built on Python and UV-Corn, which is an asynchronous gateway interface server. So in this simpler introduction, the backend stack consists of Python, it's the language, UV-Corn, which is the asynchronous gateway interface server that the app is using to run on the server. There's the front end, which is called Flet, and this handles both the back end and the front end communication. Communication is taking place through WebSockets and HTTP. We're not going to deal with REST API interfaces during this particular course.